In the heart of Manhattan, where the city's pulse thrummed with ambition and excess, Eleanor Hartwell sat at a corner table in Lumiere, New York's most exclusive restaurant, a sanctuary of opulence where the price of a tasting menu could cover a month's rent for most. At 80, Eleanor was a figure of quiet, commanding elegance, her silver hair swept into a flawless chignon, her posture as impeccable as the tailored navy dress she wore, its fabric whispering wealth with every subtle movement. Her eyes, a piercing blue-gray reminiscent of a storm-tossed sea, missed nothing, though they carried a weariness that no amount of luxury could erase. She was a billionaire, the matriarch of Hartwell Enterprises, a global conglomerate built by her late husband Edward, whose name was etched into skyscrapers and stock markets alike. Yet for all her wealth, Eleanor's world was a hollow one, a gilded cage of crystal chandeliers and empty evenings. She dined alone tonight, as she often did, choosing a Tuesday for its lack of significance. No anniversaries, no birthdays, just the quiet anonymity of a weekday to shield her from the ghosts of her past. The dining room at Lumiere was a study in perfection, tables draped in heavy ivory linen candlelight flickering off polished silver, and the soft clink of cutlery creating a delicate symphony that underscored murmured conversations. Waitstaff moved like shadows, their efficiency honed to invisibility, ensuring the elite clientele titans of industry celebrities and old money heirs could dine undisturbed. Eleanor's son, Nathan Hartwell, the CEO of Hartwell Enterprises, sat across from her, his sharp features illuminated by the glow of his phone as he spoke in clipped tones about market shares and acquisitions. At 45, Nathan was the embodiment of ambition, his suit tailored to surgical precision, his dark hair streaked with premature gray from the weight of running an empire. "Mother, the board is pushing for the takeover of Zenith Technologies," he said, his voice a practiced monotone. "It's $1 trillion move. We need your approval on the final terms." Eleanor offered a faint smile, her gaze drifting past him to the room's glittering ambiance. She had heard these pitches 1,000 times, each one blending into the next, a relentless drone of numbers and strategies that filled the silence, but never the void within her. Edward had been gone for 15 years, taken by a sudden heart attack that left Eleanor to navigate a world drained of color. The empire he built thrived under Nathan's leadership, but it was a cold legacy, one that offered no comfort against the loneliness that clung to her like a second skin. She sipped her wine, a rare Bordeaux, its taste sharp and fleeting, and let her eyes wander, seeking distraction from the ache that had become her constant companion. The restaurant was a microcosm of her world, beautiful, controlled, and suffocatingly lonely. Her gaze settled on a young waitress moving toward their table, a water pitcher in hand. The girl was unremarkable at first glance, her uniform crisp, but slightly worn at the cuffs. Her dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail, her movements efficient, but tinged with the fatigue of someone stretched too thin. Her skin was a rich brown, her features soft, yet resolute, and her name tag read Olivia. She refilled their glasses with a practiced grace, her eyes downcast, avoiding the weight of Nathan's dismissive glance. "Anything else, Mr. Hartwell?" "Mrs. Hartwell," she asked, her voice soft but clear, carrying a warmth that stood out in the sterile elegance of Lumiere. Nathan waved her off, without looking up, already engrossed in his phone again, but Eleanor's attention was caught not by the girl's face, but by something glinting at her neck. Peeking from the collar of her uniform was a thin silver chain, delicate and unassuming, the kind of thing easily overlooked. But it was the pendant that stopped Eleanor's breath, a small heart-shaped locket, its silver faintly tarnished with intricate engravings radiating from a tiny emerald at its center. Time seemed to freeze. The clatter of the restaurant faded into a dull roar, and Eleanor's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that drowned out Nathan's voice. It couldn't be. After 50 years, it simply couldn't be. There were countless lockets in the world, but this one was hers. She knew every curve of its hand-engraved pattern, every imperfection in the silver. She had designed it herself a lifetime ago, when she was a girl of 22, in love with a man her family deemed unworthy. The locket was a relic of a forbidden love, a gift to her daughter Grace, the child she was forced to give up. Eleanor's mind spiraled back to a summer long buried to a cramped apartment in Brooklyn, filled with the scent of coffee and the sound of jazz drifting from a battered radio. James Carter, a musician with soulful eyes and calloused fingers, had been her world. He was poor, black, and brilliant, his saxophone weaving melodies that made her heart ache with possibility. Their love was a secret, hidden from her rigid old money family, who valued lineage and wealth above all else. When Eleanor became pregnant, her parents' fury was a cold, crushing force. They sent her to a secluded estate upstate, away from James, away from the life she dreamed of. The locket, crafted by Eleanor from a piece of her grandmother's silver, was her final gift to the baby she held only once, a tiny, perfect girl with her father's eyes. She had pressed it into the infant's blanket, a desperate promise to find her one day before the adoption agency whisked her away. "Mother, are you listening?" Nathan's voice cut through her reverie, sharp with impatience. Eleanor didn't respond. Her vision tunneled fixed on the locket. As memories flooded back James's laughter, the weight of her parents' disapproval. The sterile room where she gave birth, the unbearable silence when her daughter was taken. Her hand trembled, the wine glass clinking against the table as she set it down. A sound escaped her lips, a choked guttural sob that shattered the refined atmosphere of Lumiere. Her manicured fingers flew to her mouth, but the tears came anyway, hot and unstoppable, carving paths through her carefully applied makeup. The room seemed to hold its breath, patrons glancing discreetly, their curiosity cloaked in politeness. Nathan looked up, startled, his phone forgotten. "Mother, what's wrong? You look pale," he said, concern warring with irritation. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with a mixture of disbelief and anguish. "That locket," she said, her finger pointing shakily at Olivia, who had frozen mid-step, sensing the intensity of the older woman's stare. "Where did you get that locket?" Olivia's hand instinctively rose to her neck, tucking the pendant further into her collar, a protective gesture that only deepened Eleanor's certainty. The girl's eyes, wide with confusion, darted from Eleanor to Nathan, then back again. It was my mother's," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "She gave it to me." Eleanor's heart lurched. "Your mother," she repeated, her voice breaking. "What's her name? Where is she?" The questions tumbled out raw and urgent, as if the answers could rewrite 50 years of loss. Nathan, recovering from his shock, leaned forward, his tone clipped. "Mother, you're making a scene. This is hardly the place." He turned to Olivia, his expression a mask of corporate authority. "Miss, we're fine here. You can go." But Eleanor's hand shot out, her grip surprisingly strong as she caught Olivia's wrist. "No, please, don't go," she pleaded, her voice thick with emotion. "I need to know about that locket." Olivia stood rooted to the spot, her worn shoes scuffing the polished floor, her apron bearing a faint coffee stain that seemed to scream her place in this world. The attention of the entire restaurant was on her now, a suffocating weight. She was acutely aware of the gulf between her life scraping by on double shifts, caring for her sick mother, and the glittering world of the woman before her. "It's just a locket," Olivia said softly, her voice steady despite her discomfort. "It's been in my family forever. It's not for sale if that's what you're thinking." The words were polite but firm, a quiet defiance that struck Eleanor like a lightning bolt. This girl with her worn uniform and exhausted eyes had something Eleanor's billions could never buy: integrity tied to a memory. Nathan scoffed, pulling out his wallet. "Everything's for sale," he said, sliding several $100 bills across the table. "For your trouble." Olivia flinched, stepping back as if the money were a physical affront. "No, thank you," she said, her voice sharper now. "It's not about money." She turned to Eleanor, her eyes softening with something like pity. "I'm sorry if I upset you, ma'am. I need to get back to work." With that, she slipped away, disappearing into the kitchen, leaving Eleanor trembling and Nathan fuming. The maitre d', a wiry man named Philippe, hurried over his face, a mask of professional concern. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Hartwell?" he asked, his voice a soothing murmur. Nathan waved him off. "My mother's just feeling unwell. A momentary episode. We're fine." But Eleanor wasn't fine. Her tears had stopped, replaced by a steely resolve she hadn't felt in years. That locket wasn't a coincidence. It was a beacon, a thread pulling her toward a truth she had buried for half a century. "Nathan," she said, her voice low and resolute, "find out who she is. Her full name, where she lives. Everything." Nathan stared, bewildered. "Mother, this is absurd. It's a piece of jewelry. You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment." Eleanor's gaze was unwavering, her blue-gray eyes burning with a fire he hadn't seen since his father's funeral. "Do it," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "This is not about the locket. It's about her." As Nathan reluctantly nodded, already pulling out his phone to make calls, Eleanor's mind drifted back to that long-ago summer. She saw James's face, his smile as he played a melody just for her, the way he promised they'd build a life together despite the world's disapproval. She saw the locket, its heart-shaped pendant, a symbol of their love, a promise to their daughter. She had spent decades hiring investigators, chasing dead ends, trying to find Grace, but her parents had covered their tracks too well. The adoption was sealed, the records buried, and James had vanished, threatened, paid off, or worse, she never knew. Now, in the unlikeliest of places, a waitress had brought that promise back to life. Eleanor clutched her napkin, her knuckles white as a flicker of hope, fragile, dangerous, and impossibly alive, ignited within her. This was no mere coincidence. This was fate, and she would not let it slip away again. Olivia Bennet stepped out of Lumiere's kitchen into the damp, neon-lit streets of Manhattan, her apron stuffed into her worn backpack, her feet aching from a 10-hour shift. The night air was cool, carrying the sharp scent of rain and hot dog carts, but it did little to soothe the knot of anxiety twisting in her gut. The encounter with Eleanor Hartwell, the billionaire whose tears had turned a routine water refill into a surreal spectacle, lingered like a fever dream. Olivia's hand drifted to the silver locket at her neck, its heart-shaped pendant warm against her skin, the tiny emerald at its center catching the glow of a passing streetlight. It was her mother's, the only tangible piece of Clara Bennett's past, a relic Olivia had worn since she was a child. She didn't understand why it had unraveled a woman like Eleanor, whose wealth could buy entire city blocks. But the memory of those tears, raw, unguarded, and utterly out of place in Lumiere's polished world, haunted her. She hurried toward the subway, her sneakers splashing through shallow puddles, her mind racing with questions she had no answers for. Olivia's life was a balancing act on a fraying tightrope. At 24, she worked 2 jobs nights at Lumiere, mornings at a greasy diner called the Rusty Spoon, to keep the lights on in the tiny Heirloom apartment she shared with her mother. Clara was 52, but looked a decade older, her body frail from a degenerative neurological condition that stole her memory in fits and starts. Medical bills piled up on the kitchen counter like a paper monument to their struggles, each one a reminder of the debt collectors who called daily, their voices polite but relentless. Olivia's shifts left her bone-tired, but she pushed through, driven by a fierce love for her mother, who had raised her alone after a childhood marked by hardship. The locket, with its intricate engravings and stubborn clasp that refused to open, was Clara's most cherished possession, a gift from a past she rarely spoke of. "It's your story," Clara would say on her good days, her voice soft but certain. "It's all I have left of her." Olivia never knew who her was. Clara's own mother, perhaps a woman lost to time and secrecy. Back at her apartment, a cramped second-floor walk-up with peeling paint and a perpetually leaky faucet, Olivia found Clara sitting by the window wrapped in a faded quilt. The room smelled of chamomile tea and the faint antiseptic tang of Clara's medications. Her mother's eyes, once bright with laughter, were clouded. Tonight, her hands trembling as she clutched a mug. "Liv, you're late," Clara said, her voice thin but warm. "Rough night." Olivia forced a smile, dropping her backpack by the door. "Just the usual, Mama." "How are you feeling?" Clara's gaze drifted to the window, where the city's lights blurred into a hazy glow. "Like I'm floating." She murmured a phrase that broke Olivia's heart. The good days were fewer now, the moments of clarity slipping away like sand through her fingers. She knelt beside her mother, brushing a strand of graying hair from her face. "You need to rest," she said gently, but her thoughts were still on Eleanor. Hartwell on the way, the billionaire's hand had trembled as she pointed at the locket. Across town in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Eleanor Hartwell sat in a leather armchair, her silk robe pooling around her like liquid moonlight. The city sprawled beneath her, a glittering tapestry of ambition, but her focus was inward, locked on the memory of that locket. She had barely slept her dreams, a chaotic swirl of James Carter's saxophone, her daughter's tiny fingers, and the cold, disapproving faces of her parents. The locket was no mere trinket. It was a promise, a piece of her heart, given to Grace before the world tore them apart. Eleanor's parents, the Chadwicks, had been old-money aristocrats, their wealth rooted in steel and railroads, their values in appearances and control. When they discovered her pregnancy at 22, they saw it as a stain on their legacy, a scandal to be erased. James, with his music and his dreams, was no match for their power. They sent Eleanor away, paid James to disappear, and arranged for Grace's adoption, sealing the records with their influence. Eleanor had fought, begged, but she was young, powerless, and alone. The locket was her only act of defiance, a beacon she hoped would one day lead her back to her daughter. Now, 50 years later, that beacon had reappeared on the neck of a waitress. Eleanor's hands shook as she dialed William Pierce, a private investigator whose unassuming demeanor belied a knack for unearthing the impossible. "I want to know everything about her," she said, her voice steady despite the storm within. "Her name is Olivia Bennett. She works at Lumiere. Find out where she lives, who her family is, her circumstances. Be discreet. I don't want her to know she's being watched." Pierce's response was calm, professional. "Understood, Mrs. Hartwell. I'll have a preliminary report by tomorrow." As she hung up, Eleanor's gaze drifted to a small bookshelf in the corner of her vast living room, a relic among the modern art and sleek furniture. It held poetry collections and art journals, remnants of a life before wealth consumed her. She crossed the room, her fingers tracing the spine of a torn book titled Melodies of the Soul. Tucked inside was a faded photograph, a young Eleanor, her hair loose, her smile radiant standing beside James Carter, his saxophone slung across his chest. His dark eyes held a fire that had once set her world alight. The locket crafted from her grandmother's silver was his promise to her, a symbol of a future they never got to share. While Eleanor wrestled with her past, Nathan Hartwell was plotting in the present. He sat in his corner office at Hartwell Enterprises, the city skyline a backdrop to his calculations. To him, the incident at Lumiere was a problem to be solved, a glitch in his mother's otherwise predictable composure. He saw Olivia as a threat, a clever opportunist exploiting a piece of jewelry to manipulate a vulnerable billionaire. Nathan had inherited his father's business acumen, but none of his empathy, viewing the world through a lens of transactions and leverage. He called his assistant, a sharp young woman named Lauren. "Run a background check on Olivia Bennett, the waitress from Lumiere," he ordered. "I want everything, finances, family vulnerabilities. And get me in touch with the restaurant's owner. I want her gone." Lauren hesitated. "Sir, are you sure she's just a waitress?" Nathan's eyes narrowed. "She's a liability. Do it." By morning, Pierce's preliminary report arrived at Eleanor's penthouse. Olivia Bennett lived at 200 Sims, Amrat de Poetry at 135th Street, a run-down building in Heirloom. She was the sole caregiver for her mother, Clara Bennett, who suffered from a neurological condition requiring expensive treatment. They were drowning in medical debt, with Olivia working 2 jobs to stay afloat. The report noted her quiet resilience, her lack of criminal history, and her refusal to accept Nathan's money at the restaurant. Eleanor read the report in silence, her heart aching for the girl's struggles. The details painted a picture not of a grifter, but of a daughter, fighting for her mother's survival. The locket's presence in Olivia's life was no coincidence, it was a thread connecting her to Grace. Eleanor was certain. She instructed Pierce to dig deeper, to focus on Clara. "Find her birth records," she said. "I need to know where and when she was born. Cross-reference adoption records from that period. Spare no expense." Meanwhile, Olivia's world was unraveling. At the Rusty Spoon, her morning shift was cut short when her manager, a gruff man named Tony, pulled her aside. "You're done for the day, Liv," he said, avoiding her eyes. "And don't come in tomorrow. We're overstaffed." Olivia's stomach dropped. "Tony, I need those hours. You know that." He shrugged, his discomfort palpable. "Owner's orders. Nothing I can do." She left the diner in a daze, her mind racing. Lumiere's manager had been cold lately, too, scheduling her for fewer shifts. The pressure was mounting, a silent force, squeezing her from all sides. She suspected Nathan Hartwell's hand in this, his money, his influence. The thought made her clutch the locket tighter, its weight a reminder of her mother's love, her only anchor in a storm she didn't understand. That evening, Olivia sat with Clara, helping her eat a simple meal of soup and bread. Clara's hands shook, spilling broth onto the table, and Olivia gently wiped it away. "Mama, do you remember anything about the locket?" she asked, her voice soft. Clara's eyes flickered with a rare moment of clarity. "It was hers," she said, her voice frail but certain, "my mother's. She gave it to me when I was a baby, said it would keep me safe." Olivia's breath caught. Clara rarely spoke of her past, her childhood, a patchwork of foster homes and vague memories. Who was she, Mama? "Your mother." Clara's gaze grew distant, her fingers tracing the quilt's pattern. "I don't know her name. They told me she was young, that her family took her away, but she loved me. The locket. It's proof." The moment passed, and Clara's eyes clouded again, leaving Olivia with more questions than answers. Nathan's background check confirmed Pierce's findings, but fueled his suspicions. Olivia's debt, her mother's illness, her precarious existence, these were levers to be pulled. He met with Lumiere's owner, a man eager to please a Hartwell, and ensured Olivia's shifts were reduced to nothing. "She's a distraction," Nathan said, his voice cold. "Replace her." He drafted a plan offer Olivia a larger sum for the locket paired with a non-disclosure agreement. If she refused, he'd escalate. Landlords could be persuaded, debts could be called in. To Nathan, this was a game of power, and he always won. But as he finalized his strategy, a flicker of doubt crept in. His mother's tears, her absolute certainty about the locket, gnawed at him. What if there was more to this? He pushed the thought aside, focusing on control, on protecting the Hartwell name. Eleanor, meanwhile, was consumed by hope and fear. She sat by her penthouse window, the photograph of her and James in her lap, her fingers tracing his face. The locket's reappearance was a miracle, but it came with a cost, confronting a past she had buried under decades of wealth and restraint. She thought of Olivia, her quiet strength, her refusal to sell a piece of her mother's history. It wasn't greed, it was love, the same love Eleanor had felt for Grace. The possibility that Clara was her daughter, that Olivia was her granddaughter, was both exhilarating and terrifying. She clutched the photograph tighter, her resolve hardening. She would find the truth no matter the cost. The locket was a key, and Olivia Bennett was the door to a past she had never stopped mourning. The air in Olivia Bennett's cramped Harlem apartment was thick with the scent of chamomile tea and the faint hum of a city that never slept. Olivia sat on the edge of the worn sofa, her hands clasped tightly around the heart-shaped locket, its silver cool against her skin, the tiny emerald at its center, glinting faintly in the dim light of a single lamp. Her mother, Clara, dozed fitfully in her chair by the window, her quilt slipping to reveal frail shoulders hunched against the chill of the evening. Olivia's mind was a storm of fear and confusion. The past week had been a descent into chaos. Her hours at the Rusty Spoon had been slashed to nothing. Lumiere had quietly let her go with a vague excuse about restructuring, and a letter from her landlord hinted at a rent increase that felt suspiciously targeted. She knew Nathan Hartwell was behind it, his cold, calculating presence looming like a shadow over her life. His offer of money for the locket, paired with thinly veiled threats, had left her shaken but resolute. The locket was her mother's, her only tether to a past Clara could no longer fully recall, and Olivia would not surrender it, not for $10,000, not for $100 or 1,000. Across Manhattan, in the sterile elegance of her Central Park penthouse, Eleanor Hartwell stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, the city's skyline a glittering reminder of the empire she had inherited but never truly wanted. Her silk blouse and tailored slacks were a far cry from the bohemian dresses of her youth, but her eyes, those storm-gray eyes, burned with a fire that hadn't dimmed in 50 years. William Pierce's latest report lay open on the glass table beside her, its pages a map to a truth she had chased for decades. Clara Bennett, born October 15, 1973 at San Mary's home for unwed mothers in upstate New York, adopted the next day. The birth mother's name, listed on a sealed certificate unearthed through Pierce's relentless digging, and a discreet court order, was Eleanor Margaret Chadwick, her maiden name. The revelation had hit Eleanor like a physical blow, stealing her breath and flooding her with a dizzying mix of joy and grief. Clara was Grace, her lost daughter, and Olivia, the fierce young woman who had refused Nathan's money, was her granddaughter. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she clutched a small velvet pouch from her safe. Its contents, a single silver earring shaped like a heart, a matching piece to the locket she had crafted for Grace. The earring was all she had left of James Carter, the musician whose love had been her rebellion against a family that valued wealth over heart. James had melted down his only heirloom, a silver ring from his father, to create the locket and one earring, keeping the other as a promise to find her and their child. That promise had been broken not by choice, but by the Chadwick family's power, which crushed him as easily as it had crushed Eleanor's dreams. Now the locket's reappearance was a miracle, a second chance she would not squander. She dialed Pierce again, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I need an appointment with Dr. Evelyn Harper at Mount Sinai," she said. "She's the best neurologist in the country. Fly her to New York if you have to, and get me Clara Bennett's address. I'm going to see them." Pierce hesitated. "Mrs. Hartwell, are you sure this could be delicate?" Eleanor's tone was unyielding. "I've waited 50 years, I'm sure." Meanwhile, Nathan Hartwell sat in his office at Hartwell Enterprises, the glow of his computer screen casting harsh shadows across his face. His plan to neutralize Olivia had backfired spectacularly. Her refusal to sell the locket despite his escalating pressure had only deepened his mother's obsession. He saw it as a weakness, a crack in the Hartwell armor that could expose them to scandal or manipulation. To Nathan, Olivia was a problem, a poor, desperate waitress who had stumbled onto a piece of leverage and was playing it for all it was worth. He had doubled down, instructing his team to lean on her landlord and her employers, ensuring her life became untenable. But a nagging doubt gnawed at him, fueled by Eleanor's tears and the intensity of her conviction. He pushed it aside, focusing on a new strategy, a $150,000 offer paired with a legal agreement that would silence Olivia forever. He dispatched his most trusted associate, a man named Victor Kane, to deliver the ultimatum. Olivia was wiping down the kitchen counter when a sharp knock echoed through the apartment. Her heart sank, expecting another debt collector, or worse, one of Nathan's men. She opened the door to find Victor, a tall figure in a charcoal suit, his expression as cold as the steel in his eyes. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice clipped. "Mr. Hartwell requests a word." Olivia's instinct was to slam the door, but Victor's hand caught it, holding it open with effortless strength. "It's not a request," he added, gesturing to a black SUV idling at the curb. Reluctantly, she followed her hand, clutching the locket, as she slid into the vehicle's leather interior. Nathan sat across from her, his laptop closed, his gaze piercing. "Let's end this," he said, sliding an envelope across the seat. $150,000. You sign the agreement, hand over the locket, and walk away. Refuse, and I'll make sure you lose more than your jobs." Olivia's hands shook, not with fear, but with fury. "You don't get it," she said, her voice low but firm. "This isn't about money. It's my mother's. It's all I have of her past." Nathan leaned forward, his tone icy. "Your mother's past, spare me. You're in debt up to your eyeballs, Miss Bennett. Your mother's in a state hospital soon if you can't pay those bills. Take the money. Be practical." Olivia's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "You think you can buy everything," she said. "You can't buy this." She pushed the envelope back, her heart hammering, as she stepped out of the SUV, ignoring Victor's glare. She ran back to her apartment, her breath ragged, and found Clara awake, her eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks. "Liv, what's wrong?" Clara asked, her voice fragile but concerned. Olivia sank beside her, the locket still in her hand. "Mama, the locket. Do you know anything else about it? Please, I need to know." Clara's fingers brushed the pendant, her gaze distant. "There's a trick to it," she murmured. "A notch near the top. Press it." Olivia's hands trembled as she examined the locket, finding a tiny indentation on the heart's upper curve. She pressed it with her fingernail, and with a faint click, the locket sprang open. Inside, under a sliver of glass, was a faded photograph of a young woman with storm-gray eyes and a radiant smile, Eleanor Hartwell, decades younger. On the other side, etched in delicate script, were the words, "For Grace, my heart forever." Olivia's breath caught. Grace. The name Clara, sometimes whispered in her sleep. The pieces fell into place with shattering clarity. Eleanor's tears, her desperation, the locket's significance. Clara was Grace, and Eleanor was her mother, Olivia's grandmother. Before Olivia could process the revelation, a soft knock sounded at the door. She opened it to find Eleanor Hartwell standing in the hallway, dressed simply in a cashmere sweater and slacks, her face pale with nervous hope. "Olivia," she said, her voice trembling, "may I come in? I need to speak to you and your mother." Olivia nodded, stepping aside, her mind reeling. Eleanor's eyes found Clara, who was stirring in her chair, her expression vacant but calm. "Grace." Eleanor whispered the name, a prayer she hadn't spoken aloud in 50 years. She knelt beside Clara, her hand reaching out, but hesitating, as if afraid to break the fragile moment. Olivia held up the open locket, her voice shaking. "She told me how to open it. I saw the picture. The words. You're her mother, aren't you?" Eleanor's tears fell freely now, not of grief, but of a joy so profound it bordered on pain. "Yes," she said. "And you're my granddaughter." The moment was shattered by the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway. The door swung open without warning, and Nathan Hartwell strode in, flanked by Victor and another man, their presence an intrusion that sucked the warmth from the room. Nathan's eyes swept over the scene, his mother kneeling beside a frail woman, Olivia clutching the locket, and his face twisted with contempt. "This is pathetic," he spat. "You've let her manipulate you, mother. A waitress with a sob story and a cheap piece of jewelry." He turned to Olivia, his voice venomous. "How much? Name your price." "500,000. $1 million. End this charade." Olivia shrank back, but Eleanor rose, her posture regal, her eyes blazing with a fury Nathan had never seen. "Enough," she said, her voice a whip crack in the small apartment. "This is not a charade, Nathan. This is my daughter Grace. This is your sister. And Olivia is your niece." Nathan laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "Sister-niece? You've lost your mind. You never mentioned a daughter in my entire life." Eleanor stepped closer, her voice steady but laced with pain. "Because I was forced to hide her. My parents, your grandparents, took her from me. They sent me away threatened. James buried the truth to protect their precious name. I was 22. Nathan, a girl with no power. I gave her that locket, the only thing I could give, and I've spent every day since searching for her." She gestured to the locket in Olivia's hand, the photograph and inscription undeniable proof. "Look at it," she commanded. Nathan's eyes flicked to the locket, to the young Eleanor's face, to the words, "For Grace, my heart forever." His certainty wavered, the cold logic of his world cracking under the weight of an emotional truth he couldn't dismiss. "You've bullied this girl," Eleanor continued, her voice rising. "You've used our wealth to crush her, to take away her livelihood, her home, because you saw her as a threat. But she's family, Nathan. She refused your money, protected her mother's legacy, when she could have taken your fortune and walked away. That's not manipulation. That's love." Nathan's face paled, his arrogance dissolving as he looked at Clara, at Olivia, at the locket. For the first time he saw not a scam, but a family he had never known, a history his mother had carried in silence. The weight of his actions, his threats, his cruelty, settled over him like a suffocating fog. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The man who thrived on control was suddenly achingly lost. Eleanor turned back to Olivia, her expression softening. "I've found you," she said, her voice breaking. "After all these years, I've found you both." She reached for Olivia's hand, then Clara's, her touch gentle but firm, as if anchoring herself to this new reality. Nathan stood frozen, his men shifting uncomfortably in the doorway. The apartment with its cracked walls and faded furniture was no longer a place of poverty, but a sacred space where a family torn apart by time and circumstance had begun to mend. Olivia's tears fell silently, her heart torn between fear of Nathan's power and the overwhelming truth of her heritage. Clara stirred her eyes, meeting Eleanor's for a fleeting moment, a spark of recognition passing between them. The locket, a small tarnished thing, had unlocked a truth that no amount of wealth could buy, and in its light, the Hartwell legacy was forever changed. The small Heirloom apartment with its chipped paint and threadbare carpet felt like a sanctuary in the aftermath of the storm. Olivia Bennet stood by the window, the heart-shaped locket still clutched in her hand, its open halves revealing the faded photograph of a young Eleanor Hartwell and the inscription, "For grace my heart forever." The air was heavy with the weight of a 50-year-old secret laid bare, a truth that had reshaped the lives of everyone in the room. Eleanor sat beside Clara, her daughter Grace, whose frail form was wrapped in a quilt, her eyes flickering with fleeting moments of clarity. The reunion, fragile and sacred, was a bubble of time where past and present converged, but the echoes of Nathan Hartwell's confrontation lingered, a reminder of the forces that had nearly torn this fragile family apart again. Olivia's heart pounded, torn between the joy of discovering her grandmother and the fear of what Nathan's wealth and power could still do. Yet, as she looked at Eleanor, whose storm-gray eyes shone with a love that transcended decades, she felt a spark of hope, a chance for something new, something whole. Eleanor's voice broke the silence, steady but soft, as she stroked Clara's hand. "I've found you, Grace." She whispered the name, a melody she had carried in her heart for half a century. "And you, Olivia, my granddaughter." Her gaze shifted to Olivia, a smile trembling on her lips, a mixture of relief and regret. "I'm so sorry it took me so long." Olivia nodded, her throat tight with emotion, unable to find words for the whirlwind of the past hour. Clara stirred her eyes, meeting Eleanor's, and for a moment, a ghost of recognition passed across her face. "The locket," Clara murmured, her voice faint but clear. You gave it to me." Eleanor's tears fell silent and steady as she nodded. "Yes, my darling, I did. To keep you safe, to guide you back to me." The moment was fleeting. Clara's clarity faded, her gaze drifting to the window, but it was enough. It was a bridge across a chasm of time, a connection no illness could fully erase. Outside, the city hummed with its relentless rhythm, but inside, time seemed to pause, holding the three women in a fragile embrace. Eleanor pulled out her phone, her movements purposeful, despite the tremble in her hands. "This is Eleanor Hartwell," she said into the receiver, her voice regaining its commanding edge. "I need Dr. Evelyn Harper in New York by tomorrow morning. Arrange my jet at Teterboro. I don't care about her schedule, make it happen. And reserve a private wing at Mount Sinai for a patient, Clara Bennett. Cost is no object." She hung up, turning to Olivia. "Your mother will have the best care in the world. I promise you that. And you. Olivia, you'll never have to work 2 jobs again unless you choose to. You can go to school, travel anything you want. The world is yours now." Olivia shook her head, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say, Mrs. Hartwell, Eleanor. It's too much. Eleanor's smile was gentle but firm. It's not too much. It's what family does. And you don't have to say anything. Just let me be here with you and Grace. Nathan Hartwell, meanwhile, stood on the sidewalk outside the apartment building, the cold night air biting through his tailored coat. His men had retreated at Eleanor's command, leaving him alone with the weight of his actions. The confrontation had shattered his carefully constructed world, a world where money solved problems and emotions were liabilities. The locket with its undeniable proof. The photograph, the inscription, had forced him to see Olivia not as a threat, but as family, a niece he had tried to crush, with the same ruthlessness he applied to boardroom battles. He saw Clara, his sister, a woman who had lived a life of struggle, while he basked in privilege, unaware of her existence. The shame was a new, corrosive emotion burning away the arrogance that had defined him. He thought of his father Edward, a man who had balanced ambition with kindness, a quality Nathan had dismissed as weakness. Now faced with the truth of his mother's past and his own cruelty, he felt like a stranger to himself. Nathan climbed into his car, but instead of heading back to his office, he drove aimlessly through the city, the skyline blurring past. He thought of Olivia's defiance, her refusal to sell the locket despite her desperation, and of his mother's unwavering love for a daughter she had lost. He had seen the world as a series of transactions, but this sessy human truth was something he couldn't buy or control. For the first time in years, he felt small, not the titan of Hartwell Enterprises, but a man who had failed his family. He pulled over near the Hudson, staring at the water's dark expanse, and made a decision. He couldn't undo the past, but he could try to make amends. He picked up his phone and called Lauren, his assistant. "Undo it," he said, his voice rough. "The landlord. The jobs, everything we did to Olivia Bennett. Fix it. And tell Lumiere to reinstate her with back pay." Lauren's silence spoke volumes, but she agreed. Nathan hung up his hands, gripping the steering wheel, knowing this was only a start. Back in the apartment, Eleanor sat with Olivia, sharing fragments of a story she had kept locked away for decades. "Your grandfather, James Carter, was a musician," she said, her voice soft with memory. "He played the saxophone like he was pouring his soul into every note. We met at a jazz club in Brooklyn when I was young and reckless, sneaking away from my family's rules. He was poor, black, and the most brilliant man I'd ever known. My parents saw him as a threat to their legacy, and when I got pregnant, they made sure he disappeared. I don't know if they paid him off or threatened him, but he was gone. And so was our daughter, your mother." Olivia listened, her heart aching for the love her grandmother had lost for the life Clara might have had. "The locket was my promise to her." Eleanor continued, her fingers brushing the pendant in Olivia's hand. "I made it from my grandmother's silver, poured all my love into it. I never thought I'd see it again." Olivia's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Clara, who had drifted into a peaceful sleep. "She always said it was her story," Olivia said. "I didn't know what she meant until now." Eleanor nodded, her gaze distant. "She was my grace, my heart. And you're the strength I never had. You protected her, protected this locket when you had every reason to take the money. That's who you are, Olivia." The words settled over Olivia like a warm blanket, easing the fear that had gripped her for days. She thought of Nathan's threats of the jobs she'd lost, but in this moment, with Eleanor's hand in hers, those fears felt smaller, less insurmountable. She was no longer just Olivia Bennett, the waitress drowning in debt. She was Olivia, granddaughter of Eleanor Hartwell, daughter of Grace, a link in a chain that had been broken but was now being forged anew. The next morning, Clara was admitted to Mount Sinai, where Dr. Evelyn Harper, flown in on Eleanor's jet, began a comprehensive evaluation. Eleanor spared no expense, renting a private wing to ensure Clara's comfort and dignity. Olivia stayed by her mother's side, holding her hand. As tests were run, her heart buoyed by the hope that treatment could slow Clara's decline. Eleanor visited daily, bringing small gifts, a soft scarf, a book of poetry and stories of the past, piecing together the life Clara had lived in foster homes and later as a single mother. Olivia began to see her mother not just as a fragile figure, but as a woman who had fought to survive, who had clung to the locket as a symbol of love she could barely remember. Nathan, too, began to change. He met with Olivia at the hospital, his posture no longer rigid with arrogance, but softened by shame. "I was wrong," he said, his voice low, his eyes avoiding hers. "I saw you as a problem to be solved. Not a person. Not family. I'm sorry." Olivia studied him, seeing the cracks in his polished exterior, the struggle to reconcile his actions with the truth. "You hurt us," she said simply. "But you're here now. That's a start." Nathan nodded, offering a tentative gesture, a check to cover Clara's medical bills, not as a bribe, but as a step toward amends. Olivia accepted it not for herself, but for her mother, knowing it would ease the burden that had weighed on them for years. As weeks passed, the Hartwell family began to heal. Eleanor moved Olivia and Clara into a spacious apartment near the hospital, ensuring they had every comfort. Olivia enrolled in night classes, dreaming of a degree in social work to help others like her mother. Nathan, humbled by his mistakes, started a foundation to support families facing medical debt, a quiet tribute to the sister he had never known. Clara's condition stabilized, her moments of clarity more frequent, and in those moments she and Eleanor rebuilt their bond, one story, one touch at a time. The locket, now a shared treasure, rested on Clara's bedside table, its heart-shaped form a reminder of the love that had endured. The lesson of their story was clear. Family is not defined by wealth or status, but by the unbreakable threads of love that weave through generations, sometimes lost, but never truly severed. Eleanor's billions could buy hospitals and jets, but they could not buy back the years she had lost with Grace. Yet in finding Olivia and Clara, she discovered a wealth far greater, a family reunited by a locket that held a 50-year-old promise. For Olivia, the journey taught her the power of resilience, of holding fast to what matters most, even when the world tries to take it away. For Nathan, it was a humbling reminder that power without heart is empty, that true strength lies in compassion and accountability. Their story, born from a chance encounter in a restaurant, was a testament to the enduring power of love, a call to cherish family, to forgive, and to build connections that transcend time and circumstance. It was a reminder that the greatest treasures are not those we can buy, but those we fight to keep love, memory, and the people who make us whole.